Sir, those are just costume jewelry, right? You can't really expect a discount for that, the young clerk sneered, gesturing dismissively toward the row of miniature medals pinned quietly inside Sergeant Major Frank Colby's slightly worn jacket. Frank, 75, leaning heavily on his cane, felt a familiar flush of anger mixed with fatigue. These aren't costumes, son. They stand for 30 years of service. The clerk just rolled his eyes. Sure they do. Full price for the coffee. 10 minutes later, as Frank sat outside nursing his pride more than the overpriced coffee, the store's cheerful music cut off. A voice, crisp and commanding, echoed from the speakers. Attention, store patrons and staff. This is General Alistair Reed. If you believe true valor deserves respect, not ridicule, comment honor them below. Sergeant Major Frank Colby, U.S. Army retired, moved with the deliberate slowness born of decades of hard service and the lingering pain of old injuries. A parachute jump accident in Panama had left him with a permanent limp, requiring the sturdy oak cane he now relied on. His face told the story of a life lived outdoors and under pressure, deeply lined, with kind eyes that had witnessed too much but still held a quiet spark of resilience. He lived modestly on his pension and disability benefits in a small apartment. His days were filled with quiet routines, visits to the VA clinic, reading history books, and occasional treasured outings for a good cup of coffee and a newspaper at a local cafe. Or, as today, the upscale Provisions and Company market that had recently opened downtown. Provisions and Company was all gleaming chrome, organic produce, and artisanal everything. Frank felt a bit out of place in his clean but well-worn tweed jacket, sensible slacks, and orthopedic shoes. But they advertised a veterans and seniors discount, and he'd heard their coffee was excellent. Pinned discreetly on the inside lapel of his jacket, visible only if he opened it, was a miniature ribbon bar, the silver star, bronze star with valor, purple heart among them. Not for show, but as a quiet personal reminder, a small piece of his identity he rarely displayed. But today, feeling nostalgic on the anniversary of a particularly tough deployment, he'd put them on. He approached the polished counter and ordered a large black coffee. As the young clerk rang it up, Frank opened his jacket slightly. "I believe you offer a veteran's discount," he asked politely, indicating the ribbons and presenting his VA ID card. The clerk, a young man named Kevin in his early 20s with carefully styled hair and an air of bored superiority, barely glanced at the VA card. His eyes, however, snagged on the colorful miniature medals. A smirk played on his lips. "A veteran's discount, huh?" Kevin drawled, his voice carrying a mocking edge. "What are those? Your collection from a gumball machine?" Frank stiffened, his hand instinctively going to the ribbons. "These are my service medals, young man." Kevin snorted, sharing a knowing look with another employee stocking shelves nearby who had paused to listen. "Costume jewelry for your little army man fantasies. Look, old-timer, we see all sorts trying to scam a free coffee. The actual veteran's discount requires a valid current military ID, not a bunch of tin pins." "This is a valid VA identification card," Frank stated, his voice low and steady, though a tremor of anger began to rise. "And these medals are earned, not bought. They represent campaigns and actions." Kevin cut him off with a dismissive wave. Yeah, I'm sure they do. Look, I don't have time for stories either. You have a scannable current military ID for the discount or its full price. What's it going to be?" He tapped impatiently on the register. "The VA card is my current identification for these purposes," Frank persisted, trying to keep his temper in check. "And those tin pins, as you call them, include the silver star. Perhaps you should learn what that means before you mock it." Kevin just rolled his eyes, his smirk widening. "Silver star, gold star, whatever, means nothing to my register. That'll be $4.75 for the coffee unless you want to try pulling that war hero routine on someone else." The other employee chuckled audibly. The casual public ridicule of something so deeply personal, so hard-earned, hit Frank harder than any physical blow could have. He felt the stares of other customers, some curious, some embarrassed, none intervening. He saw the manager, Miss Albright, briefly glance over from her office, then turn back to her computer, clearly uninterested in a minor customer dispute. Frank's hand gripping his cane tightened until his knuckles were white. He could feel heat rising in his face. Decades of discipline kept his voice even. "There is no need for disrespect, son. I will pay for the coffee." He carefully counted out the exact change from his worn leather wallet, his movement stiff. He didn't want their discounted coffee anymore, not after this. He just wanted to leave this place, this atmosphere of casual contempt. Kevin took the money with a triumphant little flourish, printed a receipt, and slapped it on the counter. "Have a nice day, Sergeant Major," he said, the title dripping with sarcasm. Frank took his coffee and the receipt without a word. He walked slowly, leaning heavily on his cane, out of the main store area to a small, windswept patio near the entrance. He sat down heavily on a cold metal bench, the overpriced coffee growing cold in his trembling hand. He didn't drink it. The taste would be bitter, tainted by the encounter. He felt a profound weariness, a deep ache that had nothing to do with his old injuries. It was the ache of being dismissed, of having his life's service, his sacrifices, reduced to costume jewelry by an ignorant, arrogant youth. He reached inside his jacket, his fingers tracing the familiar shapes of the miniature medals. Each one represented comrades lost, battles fought, survival against the odds, costume jewelry. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking a slow, ragged breath. He wasn't one to cause trouble, but this felt different. This wasn't just about him. It was about the uniform, the service, the meaning of those ribbons. He pulled out his old, reliable cell phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found a number he hadn't used in years. A direct line he'd been given by his last divisional commander, General Alistair Reed, a man known for his fierce loyalty to his soldiers, active or retired. "Use this only if you really need it," Frank Reed had said. Frank had never needed it until now. He hesitated for only a second, then pressed dial. The phone rang twice, then a familiar gravelly voice answered, sharp and alert despite the years. "Reed." "General Reed, sir, it's Frank Colby. Sergeant Major Colby, from your old command, 3rd Infantry Division." A brief pause, then warmth infused the general's voice. "Frank, by God, it's good to hear your voice. How the devil are you, Sergeant Major? It's been too long." "I'm all right, General. Mostly," Frank said, then concisely recounted the incident at Provisions and Company, the attempt to use his VA ID for the advertised discount. The clerk's ridicule of his medals, the manager's indifference. Frank wasn't complaining, just reporting a particularly blatant instance of disrespect he believed deserved attention, especially considering the store's public claims of supporting veterans. "Provisions and Co. on Market Street, you say?" General Reed's voice had lost its warmth, replaced by a tone Frank recognized from tense tactical briefings, cold, analytical, and utterly focused. "And this clerk dismissed your service medals as costume jewelry?" "Yes, sir, among other things." "And the manager did nothing?" "No, sir," seemed uninterested. "I see," General Reed said, the two words carrying a weight of unspoken meaning. "Frank, are you still at the location?" "Yes, General. On a bench just outside the main entrance." "Don't move, Sergeant Major. I happen to be downtown for a meeting with the mayor less than 5 blocks from there. I believe my meeting itinerary just acquired a slight unscheduled detour. I'll be there in under 10 minutes. The line clicked off. Frank sat there, a little stunned by the general's swift, decisive response. He hadn't expected the general to come personally. He thought maybe a phone call to the store's corporate office, a strongly worded letter. But Alistair Reed was never one for half measures, especially when his soldiers were involved. Frank waited, watching shoppers bustle in and out of Provisions and Co., oblivious to the small drama that had unfolded and the larger one perhaps about to. The expensive coffee beside him remained untouched. 7 minutes passed, then 8. Precisely 10 minutes after Frank's call, the curated, soothing background music playing throughout Provisions and Co. abruptly stopped. A moment of confused silence, then a sharp click followed by a voice not the usual smooth announcer, but one crisp, authoritative, resonating with an unmistakable air of command. "Attention Provisions and Co. patrons and staff, your immediate attention please." Shoppers paused, looking up at the ceiling speakers. Clerk stopped stocking shelves. Kevin, the young clerk from earlier, who was now bragging to his coworker about putting some old faker in his place, froze mid-sentence. This is General Alistair Reed, United States Army retired. The voice continued calm, but with an undercurrent of steel. I am currently on the premises of this establishment. It has come to my direct attention that a decorated combat veteran, Sergeant Major Frank Colby, a man who has served this nation with distinction for over 30 years and who bears the medals to prove it, including the Silver Star for gallantry in action, was just moments ago grievously insulted and disrespected by an employee at your front counter. A collective murmur swept through the store. People started looking around, trying to spot the general, trying to understand what was happening. This employee, the general's voice continued, each word clear and sharp, not only denied Sergeant Major Colby a rightfully advertised veteran's discount, but also had the appalling audacity to mock his service medals, referring to them as costume jewelry. This incident was further compounded by the apparent indifference of the store management on duty. Kevin, the clerk, felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. He looked wildly around. His earlier bravado vanished like smoke. Miss Albright, the manager, rushed out of her office, her face a mask of alarm, looking up at the speakers as if the voice were descending from heaven itself. This level of ignorance and disrespect towards any veteran, let alone one of Sergeant Major Colby's caliber, is not just unprofessional. It is an affront to every man and woman who has ever served this nation. It is an insult. This establishment will rectify it immediately. The PA system clicked off, leaving a stunned, echoing silence in its wake, pregnant with anticipation. The store, moments before a bustling marketplace, felt like it had collectively held its breath. General Reed, who had made his way to the store's small administrative office where the PA microphone was located, escorted by a bewildered assistant manager he'd encountered en route, now strode out onto the main sales floor. He was an imposing figure even in his civilian suit, his military bearing undeniable. He quickly located Miss Albright, the manager, who was wringing her hands, and Kevin, the clerk who looked like he was about to faint. Several curious shoppers and employees had gathered at a respectful distance. Miss Albright, I presume? General Reed addressed the manager, his voice still holding that edge of command. And you, he turned to Kevin, are the employee who believes service medals are costume jewelry. Kevin could only nod miserably, avoiding the general's piercing gaze. General, I am so incredibly sorry, Miss Albright began, her voice trembling. I had no idea. This is a terrible misunderstanding. It is no misunderstanding, madam. The general cut her off, not unkindly, but with absolute firmness. It is a failure of training, a failure of oversight, and a fundamental failure of respect. Where is Sergeant Major Colby now? Just then, another store employee, who had been sent by the assistant manager, escorted Frank Colby back into the store. Frank looked surprised to be led towards the gathering crowd, and the stern-faced general he recognized instantly, even after so many years. Frank, General Reed said, his expression softening as he turned to his former sergeant major. Good to see you on your feet, though I am appalled by the circumstances. He gestured for Frank to stand beside him, then addressed the manager and clerk again. Firstly, you will both offer Sergeant Major Colby a direct, unequivocal, and sincere apology for your deplorable conduct and lack of judgment. Miss Albright and Kevin stumbled over themselves to apologize, their words clumsy with fear and regret. Frank listened, then gave a single tired nod of acknowledgement. Secondly, General Reed continued, this store, Provisions & Co., will be making a substantial donation to the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans in Sergeant Major Colby's name as a small token of atonement for this insult. The amount will be significant. My office will follow up. Miss Albright nodded quickly. Of course, General, whatever you say. Thirdly, the General's gaze swept across the store. Effective immediately, this store will close for the remainder of the day. All staff will attend an emergency mandatory sensitivity and respect training session, with a special focus on interacting with veterans and understanding the significance of their service and symbols. My foundation will provide the trainers free of charge. You will reopen tomorrow with a renewed understanding of who your customers are, especially those who have sacrificed for your freedom to conduct business. Gasps rippled through the gathered shoppers. Closing the store on a busy day was unheard of. But General, Miss Albright protested, weekly lost revenue. Consider it the cost of an education, madam, General Reed stated flatly. An education in respect. It appears to be one this establishment sorely needs. The store did close. Staff members were indeed ushered into the back for an impromptu and reportedly very impactful training session, led by a no-nonsense retired Master Gunnery Sergeant dispatched by General Reed's Foundation. Shoppers were politely asked to finish their purchases and leave, with many expressing support for the General's actions as they departed. General Reed personally escorted Frank Colby to a nearby quiet cafe, Not Provisions & Co., and bought him the best coffee they had, along with a hearty lunch. They spent an hour catching up, reminiscing about old times. The General listening intently as Frank spoke, for the first time in years, about some of his struggles. Before they parted, General Reed ensured Frank had his direct contact information for a dedicated veteran support network linked to his foundation, promising immediate assistance with housing resources, benefits navigation, and healthcare access. "No soldier of mine gets left behind, Frank," Reed said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Not on my watch, not ever." Provisions & Co. reopened the next day. There was a new prominent sign at the entrance. "We proudly offer a 15% discount to all veterans and active duty military personnel every day. Thank you for your service." Kevin the clerk was still employed, but his demeanor was reported to be remarkably more humble and respectful. Miss Albright implemented the new training protocols with vigor. The story of the general, the sergeant major, and the store shutdown became a local legend, a potent reminder that sometimes, even in the most unexpected places, honor demands recognition, and that true leadership steps in when respect falters. Frank Colby found more than just a warm cup of coffee that day. He found that camaraderie and respect, forged in the crucible of service, could indeed echo through the decades, and that sometimes a single phone call could mobilize an army of one to defend the dignity of all who served. Because the medals are never just costume jewelry, they are markers of a debt that can never be fully repaid, only respectfully acknowledged. Subscribe to my channel if you believe respect for our veterans is non-negotiable and that true leaders always stand by their troops.